the goal of Hamas was to provoke an overreaction from Israel. They obviously do not expect to, have a military victory, but they really wanted to commit the worst atrocities that they could in order to provoke the most aggressive response possible from Israel, and then leverage that aggressive response to rally Muslims worldwide for the cause of Gaza and Palestine, which they have succeeded in doing. So the counterintuitive thing here, I think that the thing that I think should be done, even though it is very difficult, is that I would recommend that Israel engage in the most conspicuous acts of kindness possible. Everything. That is the actual thing that would thwart the goal of Hamas.
So in some sense, the degree that makes sense in geopolitics, turn the other cheek, implemented.
It's not exactly turn the other cheek, because I do think that there's, I think it is appropriate for Israel to find the Hamas members and, either kill them or incarcerate them. That's something has to be done, because they're just going to keep coming otherwise. But in addition to that, they need to do whatever they can. There's some talk of establishing, for example, a mobile hospital. I'd recommend doing that. Just making sure that there's food, water, medical necessities, and just be over the top about it and be very transparent, so that people can't claim it's a trick. Like, just put a webcam on the thing, all 24/7.
Deploy acts of kindness.
Yeah, conspicuous acts of kindness that are unequivocal, meaning they can't be somehow, because Hamas will then, their response will be, oh, it's a trick. Therefore, you have to counter how is it not a trick.
This ultimately fights the broader force of hatred in the region.
Yes, and I'm not sure who said it. It's an apocryphal saying, but an eye for an eye makes everyone blind. Now that neck of the woods, they really believe in the whole eye for an eye thing. But I mean, you really have, if you're not going to just outright commit genocide, like against an entire people, which obviously would not be acceptable to really shouldn't be acceptable to anyone, then you're going to leave basically a lot of people alive who subsequently, hate Israel. So really the question is, like, how, for every Hamas member that you kill, how many did you create? Mm-hmm. And if you create more than you killed, you've not succeeded. That's the real situation there. And it's safe to say that if you kill somebody's child in Gaza, you've made at least a few Hamas members who will die just to kill an Israeli. That's the situation. So, but I mean, this is one of the most contentious subjects one could possibly discuss. But I think if the goal ultimately is some sort of long-term peace, one has to look at this from the standpoint of, over time, are there more or fewer terrorists being created?
Let me just linger on war.
Yeah, well, war. It's safe to say wars always existed and always will exist.
Always will exist.
Always has existed and always will exist.
I hope not. You think it always will?
There will always be war. It's a question of just how much war, and what there's this sort of the scope and scale of war, mm-hmm. But to imagine that there would not be any war in the future, I think would be a very unlikely outcome.
Yeah, you talked about the culture series. There's war even there.
Yes, there's a giant war. The first book starts off with a gigantic galactic war where trillions die. Trillions.
But it still nevertheless protects these pockets of flourishing. Somehow you can have galactic war and still have pockets of flourishing.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I guess if we are able to one day expand to, you know, fill the galaxy or whatever, there will be a galactic war at some point.
The scale. I mean, the scale of war has been increasing. It's like a race between the scale of suffering and the scale of flourishing.
Yes.
A lot of people seem to be using this tragedy to beat the drums of war and feed the military-industrial complex. Do you worry about this? The people who are rooting for escalation, and how can it be stopped?
One of the things that does concern me is that there are very few people alive today who actually viscerally understand the horrors of war, at least in the U.S. I mean, obviously there are people on the front lines in Ukraine and Russia who understand just how terrible war is, but how many people in the West understand it? My grandfather was in World War II. He was severely traumatized. I mean, he was there, I think, for almost 6 years in East and North Africa and Italy. All his friends were killed in front of him, and he would have died too, except they randomly gave some, I guess, IQ test or something, and he scored very high. Now, he was not an officer. He was, I think, a corporal or a sergeant or something like that, because he didn't finish high school. He had to drop out of high school because his dad died, and he had to work to support his siblings. So because he didn't graduate high school, he was not eligible for the officer corps. So, he kind of got put into the cannon fodder category, basically. But then, randomly, they gave him this test. He was transferred to British intelligence in London. That's where he met my grandmother. But he had PTSD next level. Like, next level. I mean, just didn't talk. And if you tried talking to him, he'd just tell you to shut up. And he won a bunch of medals, never bragged about it once, not even hinted, nothing. I found out about it because his military records are online. That's how I know. So he would say like, no way in hell. Do you want to do that again? But how many people? Now he obviously he died, 20 years ago or longer, actually 30 years ago. How many people are alive that remember World War II? Not many.
And the same perhaps applies to the threat of nuclear war.
Yeah, I mean, there are enough nuclear bombs pointed at the United States to make the radioactive rubble bounce many times.
There's two major wars going on right now. So you talked about the threat of AGI quite a bit, but now, as we sit here with the intensity of conflict going on, do you worry about nuclear war?
I think we shouldn't discount the possibility of nuclear war. It is a civilizational threat. Right now, I could be wrong, but I think the current probability of nuclear war is quite low. But there are a lot of nukes pointed at us. And we have a lot of nukes pointed at other people. Still there. Nobody's put their guns away. The missiles are still in the silos.
And the leaders don't seem to be the ones with the nukes talking to each other.
No. There are wars which are tragic and difficult on a local basis, and then there are wars which are civilization ending, or have that potential. Obviously, global thermonuclear warfare has high potential to end civilization, perhaps permanently, but certainly, to severely wound and perhaps set back human progress by, to the Stone Age or something. I don't know. Pretty bad. Probably scientists and engineers won't be super popular after that as well. They're like, you got us into this mess. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So generally, I think we obviously want to prioritize civilizational risks over things that are painful and tragic on a local level, but not civilizational.
How do you hope the war in Ukraine comes to an end? And what's the path, once again, to minimizing human suffering there?
Well, I think that what is likely to happen, which is really pretty much the way it is is that something very close to the current lines will be how a ceasefire or truce happens. But you just have a situation right now where whoever goes on the offensive will suffer casualties at several times the rate of whoever's on the defense. Because you've got defense in depth, you've got minefields, trenches, anti-tank defenses. Nobody has air superiority because the anti-aircraft missiles are really far better than the aircraft. Like, there are far more of them. So neither side has air superiority. Tanks are basically death traps, just slow moving, and they're not immune to anti-tank weapons. So you really just have long range artillery and infantry trenches. It's World War I all over again, with drones. Throwing little drones, some drones there,
which makes the long range artillery just that much more accurate and better, and so more efficient at murdering people on both sides.
Yeah. So it's whoever is. You don't want to be trying to advance from either side, because the probability of dying is incredibly high. So in order to overcome defense in depth trenches and minefields, you really need significant local superiority in numbers. Ideally combined arms, where you do a fast attack with aircraft, a concentrated number of tanks, and a lot of people. That's the only way you're going to punch through a line. And then you're going to punch through and then not have reinforcements just kick you right out again. I mean, I really recommend people read World War I warfare in detail. It's rough. I mean, the sheer number of people that died there was mind-boggling.
And it's almost impossible to imagine the end of it that doesn't look like almost exactly like the beginning, in terms of what land belongs to who and so on. But on the other side of a lot of human suffering, death,
yes,
and destruction of infrastructure.
Yes, I mean, the thing that the reason I proposed some sort of truce or peace a year ago was because I predicted pretty much exactly what would happen, which is a lot of people dying for basically almost no changes in land, and the loss of the flower of Ukrainian and Russian youth. And we should have some sympathy for the Russian boys as well as the Ukrainian boys, because the Russian boys didn't ask to be on that front line; they have to be. So, there's a lot of sons not coming back to their parents, and I think most of them don't really they don't hate the other side. It's sort of like, there's this saying about, like, this saying comes from World War I. It's like young boys who don't know each other killing each other on behalf of old men that do know each other. The hell's the point of that?
So Volodymyr Zelensky said that he's not, or has said in the past, he's not interested in talking to Putin directly. Do you think he should sit down, man-to-man, leader-to-leader, and negotiate peace?
Look, I think I would just recommend, do not send the flower of Ukrainian youth to die in trenches. Whether he talks to Putin or not, just don't do that. Whoever goes on the offensive will lose massive numbers of people. And history will not look kindly upon them.
You've spoken honestly about the possibility of war between U.S. and China in the long term, if no diplomatic solution is found. For example, on the question of Taiwan and one China policy.
Right.
How do we avoid the trajectory where these two superpowers clash?
Well, it's worth reading that book on the difficult to pronounce Thucydides trap, I believe it's called. I love war history. I like inside out and backwards. There's hardly a battle I haven't read about. and trying to figure out like what really was the cause of victory in any particular case, as opposed to what one side or another claimed was the reason.
Both the victory and what sparked the war and
Yeah.
the whole thing.
Yeah. So that Athens and Sparta is a classic case. The thing about the Greeks is they really wrote down a lot of stuff. They loved writing. There are lots of interesting things that happened in many parts of the world, but people just didn't write it down. So we don't know what happened, or they didn't really write in detail. They just would say like, we had a battle and we won. And like, well, what? Can you add a bit more? The Greeks, they really wrote a lot. They were very articulate on it. They just love writing. So, and we have a bunch of that writing that's preserved. So we know what led up to the Peloponnesian War between the Spartan and Athenian alliance. We know that they saw it coming. I mean, the Spartans didn't write. They also weren't very verbose by their nature, but they did write. But they weren't very verbose. They were terse. But the Athenians and the other Greeks wrote a lot, and they were like, and Sparta was really kind of like the leader of Greece. But Athens grew stronger and stronger with each passing year, and everyone's like, well, it's inevitable that there's going to be a clash between Athens and Sparta. Well, how do we avoid that? And they saw it coming, and they still could not avoid it. So, at some point, if one group, one civilization or country or whatever exceeds another, sort of like if the United States has been the biggest kid on the block since I think around 1890 from an economic standpoint. So the United States has been the most powerful economic engine in the world longer than anyone's been alive. And the foundation of war is economics. So now we have a situation in the case of China where the economy is likely to be 2, perhaps 3 times larger than that of the U.S. So imagine you're the biggest kid on the block for as long as anyone can remember, and suddenly a kid comes along who's twice your size.
So we see it coming.
Yeah.
How is it possible to stop? Is there let me throw something out there, just intermixing of cultures, understanding. There does seem to be a giant cultural gap in understanding of each other. And you're an interesting case study because you are an American, obviously. You've done a lot of incredible manufacture here in the United States, but you also work with China.
I've spent a lot of time in China and met with the leadership many times.
Maybe a good question to ask is, what are some things about China that people don't understand, positive, just in the culture? What's some interesting things that you've learned about the Chinese? Well,
the sheer number of really smart, hardworking people in China is incredible. There are really, if you say like, how many smart, hardworking people are there in China? There's far more of them there than there are here, I think, in my opinion. And they've got a lot of energy. So, I mean, the architecture in China that's in recent years is far more impressive than the U.S. I mean, the train stations, the buildings, the high-speed rail, everything. It's really far more impressive than what we have in the U.S. I mean, I recommend somebody just go to Shanghai and Beijing, look at the buildings, and go to, take the train from Beijing to Xi'an, where you have the terracotta warriors. China's got an incredible history, very long history, and I think arguably in terms of the use of language from a written standpoint, sort of one of the oldest, perhaps the oldest written language, and in China people did write things down. So now China historically has always been, with rare exception, been internally focused. They have not been acquisitive. They've fought each other. There have been many, many civil wars. In the Three Kingdoms War, I believe they lost about 70% of their population. So and they've had brutal internal wars, like civil wars that make the U.S. Civil War look small by comparison. So I think it's important to appreciate that China is not monolithic. We sort of think of like China as this sort of one entity of one mind, and this is definitely not the case. From what I've seen, and I think most people who understand China would agree, that people in China think about China 10 times more than they think about anything outside of China. So it's like 90% of their consideration is internal.
Well, isn't that a really positive thing when you're talking about the collaboration and a future peace between superpowers? When you're inward facing, which is like focusing on improving yourself versus focusing on, quote unquote, improving others through military might.
The good news, the history of China suggests that China is not acquisitive, meaning they're not going to go out and invade a whole bunch of countries. Now they do feel very strongly, so that's good. I mean, because a lot of very powerful countries have been acquisitive. The U.S. is also one of the rare cases that has not been acquisitive. Like after World War II, the U.S. could have basically taken over the world and any country. Like we got nukes, nobody else got nukes. We don't even have to lose soldiers. Which country do you want? And the United States could have taken over everything. At will, and it didn't. And the United States actually helped rebuild countries. So it helped rebuild Europe. Helped rebuild Japan. This is very unusual behavior, almost unprecedented.